Hey friends, this is Ganesh. I thought of adding few lines before a video. Could be nice. So I would like to say learning is an asset. So make sure before going to bed you learn something, at least one thing today. It may be a simple or a big one related to your career or family, sports, or just a knowledge, general knowledge, whatever it is. Make sure you learn at least one thing in a day, new thing. So after a year, you might know how many new things you learned, and this attitude will take you to very big level. Okay, so hope you might think. So today's session is about casting on object-oriented ABAP and video number 9. You might aware of what is casting. In many situations or languages, you learn about casting. Let me take you into the system first. So casting is nothing but change the existing behavior of an object. Here object is a variable or whatever it is, parameter, okay? Simply in SAP we call it as conversion. There is a variable, it got declared with a different data type called character or whatever it is. And for the business scenario, for my need, I don't want to create a new object or variable. I want to change the behavior, meaning the data type, technical aspects of a variable to accept a different value. Okay, so for that, normally we use casting. In ABAP, in OABAP, object-oriented ABAP, we are going to perform this casting in the object level. So we have a class, it has its own attributes and methods, and to access, we have an object. So we are going to perform the casting in the object level, and for this scenario, for performing the casting, we need a inheritance methodology. So we need a superclass, we need a subclass, okay, and we are going to play around with the implementation between the superclass and subclass with the help of casting concept. In object-oriented ABAP, we have two different kind of castings, narrow and wide casting. So here I'm not going to define what is narrow, what is wide. So let me start with the business scenario and explain what needs to be done. Okay. Then at the end, we can name it as, okay, this way, if you achieve the process, then that is called narrow. And this is a way that is called wide casting. Okay. So I think that will be very easy to understand. So first one, I have a superclass and I have a subclass. This subclass is inherited the objects from superclass, and I have its own object super, object subclass. Okay, ICUB sub. Very specific. A superclass has its own method called PO details. It's very generic information. PO informations are retrieving from this method, and subclass is inherited the same method and it got redefined it in the subclass, and subclass has its own method also. Okay, so it has only one method, and subclass is inherited and redefined the superclass method, and it has its own independent subclass method also. And there is a reference, okay, object for a superclass. It's going to call the PO details, means superclass method implementation, the method which got implemented in the superclass. Okay, so but that particular details is going to be called by superclass object, and subclass object is going to call the redefinition of superclass method and subclass own method. So that is going to be called using subclass object. Business scenario. So here PO details has very generic information of the PO, and the subclass, they added the very detailed material information also along with the PO details. So that got they redefined and they added their own logic. Now, for some reason, the superclass object wants to call the subclass implementation of the superclass method. Okay, so because this source of the method is superclass, so By default, it can call the implementation of this method, but the superclass object wants to call the implementation of this method. Okay, this method is the superclass method, redefinition of this one. For that, what needs to be done? To access this particular information, this superclass object needs the reference of subclass object. Okay, so once you transfer the subclass object reference to superclass object, then superclass object is good enough to call the implementation part of redefined method. It's nothing but a superclass method only. Okay, and there is a restriction. Okay, yeah, this is the one which I explained. Restriction is once the reference is available, it's not going to easily call this method as well as the independent method of the subclass. That is not possible. So superclass has a option to call only the superclass method redefinition part. So not the subclass independent methods. Okay. So for that, I have to pass the reference from subclass object to superclass object, okay, with the help of an assignment operator. So very simple. So it's like object super equal object sub. That's it. So the reference get transferred from object subclass object to superclass object. Okay. So this process is called narrow casting. So by reference, people are saying narrow casting means why is narrow casting? So this is more specific view, meaning more objects, more methods, more attributes, and everything is available. Superclass is very less attributes, less methods, less attributes because it has its own, but it doesn't have its own one. It's only private information, but subclass can have it more information. So that's why they are saying more specific to less specific. So it's called narrow casting. Okay. So subclass object reference transfer to superclass object reference, that business scenario is called narrow casting. The next one is wide casting. So the opposite, like opposite of narrow casting, so wide casting. No, I will explain the scenario, then we'll name the particular process as wide casting. Okay. So normally we are moving to sub to super, means reference of subclass object to superclass reference. We'll do the reverse way, that is wide casting. That is not possible, meaning I'll say why. Okay. This is the expectation. Subclass wants to access, same way subclass wants to access the superclass method. Why the subclass object wants to access it? Once you inherited, it will get everything. It will get all the public and protected information from superclass to subclass. So subclass object doesn't have a requirement to access the superclass attributes or methods. Okay, because once it inherited, everything is available in subclass. So this way it's not required. So the reverse way is called wide casting. It's not correct. So then what is wide casting? Scenario. Another one, whatever I'm mentioning the red color, that is not possible. So okay, let me transfer my superclass reference to subclass object, superclass object reference to subclass object. That is not possible because this is very less specific information, but this has a very more detailed information. Even if you just try to pass this one, it gets in syntax normally what you called runtime error. Okay, normally you'll get a runtime error or it just raised an exception. So this way is not possible. Then next question, what is wide casting? Now let me go to the previous slide. So this is the slide which we discussed about narrow casting. So now my object of superclass has a reference of subclass object. I'm able to call the redefinition of my method in the subclass. Everything is fine. Now I want to back, means I want to change my reference to the superclass because now it's pointed to the subclass object. So I want to change the reference of my superclass object to a superclass itself. Okay, but here this is equal to this. This is also pointing to subclass. This also pointing to subclass. I want to change this to my superclass reference. So how can I do that? One way is I'm going to create an additional object for my superclass. Okay, because in this scenario, I might aware I need one more object for the superclass. So I'm going to create maybe object super2 and transfer the reference from object superclass 2 to my object superclass. Okay, so what happened? It will override the reference of subclass to the new superclass object like this. So I'm going to have one more additional object. I'm going to transfer the reference of this superclass 2 to the object super variable or reference variable. Okay, then it got override the superclass method a reference to this object. Clear? So this is called wide casting, meaning less currently before this happened, currently it has holding the subclass object reference. So this is very less specific information to a more specific information. So less specific view to more specific view. That's why we call it as wide casting. So less methods and attributes and more methods and attributes. So clear? So this is called wide casting. So the basic idea would be, if you want to perform a wide casting, make sure you done the narrow casting already. Okay, so this is the part which I'm explaining with the inheritance along with only super and class concept. Got it? So let me take you anything else? No. Let me take you to the system and show you in the system as well as in the debugging. You will get very clear picture of casting. And for this, I'm going to use a casting operator is nothing but question mark equal. So narrow casting we use only assignment operator, but wide casting we are using question mark equal operator. Okay. This is my system. I have already super and subclasses, global level. So this is my superclass. I have pivot. It has only one method, and this is my subclass. It has redefined method and custom details. Okay, so subclass I mentioned the details like PO and material details from subclass, and superclass inside a method, the implementation is generic PO details from superclass. So there is a word superclass and subclass for easy identification. Now let me go to the program and let's create an object first. So data object for super equal to new ZCL, I believe so. Yeah, CCL JI superclass. Okay, I'll go one by one. So I'm going to create only one object for super and sub equal to, so new. You can follow the old way as well. It's like data create object. So everything is done in a single statement. Okay, there is no much difference. So now I'm going to call the superclass method PO details. I'm going to call subclass method with subclass object PO detail. So this is just an understanding. Let's before go to the wide or narrow casting. Toward it. So if I execute, it shows very clearly generic PO details from superclass, PO and material details from subclass. Now I want, using the superclass object, I want to call the subclass redefinition method. Okay, because the source of the method is superclass only. So narrow casting. What I'm going to do is, okay, always go with try catch. Okay, so try, I'm going to say, I will tell you the exception probably quite later, but try to understand. Probably you have an idea about try catch. Simply I can say avoid the runtime error. If any exception happens, I need to capture that. Here what I'm going to do is I'm going to do object super equal to object sub. Simple. Narrow casting done. And the exception is move cast error, I believe. Let's see. if this is the exception, meaning this casting fails. Okay, so issue with narrow casting. That's it. So once it is done, maybe after try or inside the try, you can do object super and call the method details. The expectation is this statement gives superclass implementation, this statement gives subclass implementation, and this statement also gives subclass implementation because of narrow casting. Okay, let's try. So superclass, subclass implementation, this is also calling using superclass object, but it shows the implementation of subclass because now the superclass object has subclass reference. I will show you in the debugging. So it's very easy to understand. At first, these two object has its own reference, right? Super has its own reference 10, sub is own reference 11. So just remember this one, 10, 11, some numbers, okay, some unique numbers. Now I'm going to call the method, and I'm going to transfer the reference 11 to the superclass object. So let's see. I'm going to press F5. Now the reference is transferred. It's very simple. The base is changed, then it should act based on this reference only. So this is declared as a superclass object, but it holding the subclass reference. Obviously, it should access only subclass details or subclass method implementation, whatever it is. Okay, so this is called narrow casting. Now, no superclass object. Anyway, I have a subclass object reference. I can call, what is that? Another independent method, cust details. It's not at all visible, right? I'll show you. Go to subclass. It has its own independent method, customer details, cust details, but it's not reflecting over there. Reason, still the object is superclass. Okay, only the reference is the subclass reference. Still the object is created for the superclass. So even if you say, what happens, it will go and check the superclass whether there is a method called cust details. Control F2, it shows very clearly method does not exist because it's checking in the superclass level, not in the subclass. Okay, so that is a restriction. Even though you have a reference, you can access only your own method which got redefined in the subclass. So comment it. Okay, anyway, that's not possible. So next one, what I'm going to do is, before wide casting, I will show you few informations. Maybe, okay, before this, I want to pass subclass super reverse way. So this is what I mentioned, the red color, right? I want to pass the reference of superclass to subclass. It's not at all required because subclass has all the rights of its superclass methods like protected and public. So this way is not required actually. Even if it's one, using a super keyword, it can access it. So I'm trying to activate it. Yes, it's giving an error. Cannot be converted to the type sub because superclass is very less view, subclass is very more view. So it's kind of a conversion error. It's not able to adapt it. Okay. Now I'm going to show you the wide casting. So wide casting, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass, means get my reference back. So for that, data object super2 equal to new ZCL GI superclass. Okay. So now for that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the things back. Wide casting object super, currently it has a reference of subclass. That reference to be changed with superclass object 2. Is it correct? Yeah, object super 2. Okay, White casting, I forgot the operator. Try catch cx sy move cast error. Right, white cast issue and try. Okay, so after this I'm going to call the same method. Let's see. View details, close this. So activate. Really? Okay, there is some. Okay. Expectation is here. First line superclass, second line subclass, third line subclass, fourth line superclass. So superclass, subclass, subclass, superclass. Okay, let's see. Okay, let's execute the output. I'll come back to the debugging. Yes, superclass, subclass, subclass, superclass. Okay, let's see in the debugging now. Oh, it's gone. 1 second. Okay, just move it a bit. Superclass 1, superclass 2, and then subclass. So okay, because it's not executed, that's why subclass is empty. Okay, so 10, 11, and 9. Okay, so now superclass, subclass, and now superclass reference is going to, superclass object reference is going to change by 9. So it's got 9. So obviously it's going to access only the implementation of subclass. And now I'm going to do a white casting. So what is white casting? Superclass is 11 and is going to change the 9 with 11. So it's now 11. So it's now is a superclass. It means reference is a superclass object. Obviously it will call the superclass implementation only. Clear? And narrow casting, this equal is fine, but still you can use a casting operator, but it is not required. Okay, just execute. So no difference over here. Superclass, subclass, subclass, and superclass. Okay, so this is just for information. It's not very specific. You have to use only narrow wide casting this question equal. That is for your indication, like identification, very easily. Okay, and no one used that, but I just for your reference I'm saying this. Okay, so narrow means always go with equal, wide means go with question and equal. Anything left over I have to say? Okay, nothing. Just play around with this, try to understand what is narrow and wide casting. Mostly in normal development we never use this concept, but once you start debugging any standard programming, you might have seen this equal, question equal for the object oriented. So going forward is very simple for you. Okay, they did some narrow casting for some reason and they just changed the narrow casting to the wide casting to access all the superclass objects. Okay, so just go ahead, and if you have any doubts, please let me know. Thank you so much for your time. See you in the next video. Bye.